I found out I was funding the lifestyle of my boyfriend's secret family while living with him and sharing a joint bank account. 2 years of my life down the drain and $87,000 in fraudulent debt hanging over my head. I have to write this all down before the weight of it crushes me completely. The first time I saw Christian, I was at my friend Jenna's gallery opening. While everyone else performed their appreciation with dramatic gestures and art world jargon, he stood apart, thoughtful, quietly confident, and refreshingly genuine. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Our early dates were a revelation after years of app-arranged meetings that felt more like job interviews than connections. Christian remembered things, not in the performative way of someone checking boxes, but with a thoughtfulness that made me feel truly seen. It was the small things that disarmed me. The way he adjusted the thermostat when he noticed me wrapping my sweater tighter around myself, how he remembered my coffee order without asking, the goodnight text that always included a reminder to let him know when I was home safe. 6 weeks in, I came down with food poisoning after a work lunch. I called to cancel our plans, embarrassed and miserable. He immediately asked for my address. An hour later, he was at my door with ginger ale, crackers, and a stack of old movies. He stayed up all night, bringing me cool washcloths for my forehead and water to stay hydrated. I remember waking at 3 a.m. to find him still there, sitting on the floor beside my bed, his back against the wall, keeping watch. 3 months into dating, Christian surprised me with a weekend trip to the coast. As the sun began to set, painting the water in golds and pinks, he pulled me close and whispered that he'd never felt this way about anyone. He told me he loved me. That night, falling asleep with his arm draped protectively around me, I remember thinking I'd never felt so secure, so cherished. Things moved quickly after that. By our 8th month of dating, I was packing my apartment into cardboard boxes while Christian arranged for movers. He justified it as making financial sense, presenting me with a spreadsheet showing how much we'd save on rent. We could put that money toward our future, he said. Our future. The words had made my chest flutter with possibilities. The first subtle shifts were so gradual, I barely noticed them. My weekly dinners with my sister Kate became monthly, then barely happened at all. Christian would observe that I always seemed upset after seeing Kate. He claimed she made little comments about my job and clothes, and that he hated seeing how down I was afterward. Then there was Rebecca, my best friend since college. When she expressed concern about how quickly Christian and I had moved in together, he seemed genuinely hurt. Later, he gently suggested that perhaps she was jealous, since she'd been single for a while. I defended Rebecca at first, but the seed was planted. The next time she raised concerns about Christian's suggestion that we combine our finances to simplify things, I found myself wondering about her motives. My work began to suffer. Christian was going through something at his job, a difficult project, a demanding boss. The details were always vague, but the impact was clear. He needed more support, more understanding, more of my time. During my quarterly review, my boss told me my performance had been slipping. It was around this time that the strange gaps in our communication began. I'd mentioned plans we'd made, and Christian would look at me with genuine confusion, insisting we never discussed them. But I was certain we had, wasn't I? Then there was the missing money. I noticed it while reviewing our shared account. $400 gone with no explanation. When I brought it up, Christian insisted we had talked about it the previous week. According to him, I had agreed he should pay off a credit card charge before it accrued more interest. His voice softened with worry as he expressed concern about how forgetful I'd been lately, asking if everything was okay with me. The receipts were the final straw. I found them while doing laundry, tucked into his jacket pocket, from restaurants I'd never been to. On evenings, he told me he was working late. When I confronted him, he had immediate explanations. Business dinners, a meeting with a client, a receipt he'd picked up for a coworker. He responded with disappointment, saying my paranoia was really starting to hurt our relationship. That night, I started a journal. Nothing elaborate, just a simple document hidden in my work laptop, password protected. I began recording our conversations, the things he claimed we'd agreed to, the money movements I couldn't quite account for. I wasn't sure if I was documenting his deception or my own failing memory. When did I start becoming someone who second-guessed every memory, who apologized for questions that deserved answers? The woman who met him at that gallery would never recognize who I'd become. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Christian was away on a 3-day business trip, and I was working from home. The mail arrived earlier than usual, and I sorted through it absently while on a conference call. Bills, flyers, a postcard from my aunt, and then an envelope with my name on it from a credit card company I didn't recognize. Inside was a statement for a card in my name with a balance of $14,238.76. I ended my call early, claiming internet issues. My hands trembled as I called the credit card company. After confirming my identity, the representative cheerfully informed me that I had opened the account 14 months ago. The card had been consistently maxed out, with minimum payments made just in time each month. I had never opened this account. I spent the next several hours in a methodical frenzy. I pulled my credit report, something I hadn't done since we moved in together. There they were, 5 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a line of credit, all in my name, all opened within the past 18 months. The total hovered just under $87,000. My pristine credit score of 780 had plummeted plummeted to 410. I needed evidence, needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. I broke my promise to myself never to invade Christian's privacy, the promise he'd extracted after finding me looking at those receipts months earlier. His laptop password was my birthday. How touching. It didn't take long to find the emails. They were organized in a folder labeled Lake Project that I had assumed was work-related. Inside were exchanges with contractors, interior designers, and a real estate agent. Christian had been renovating a property, a charming lakeside house with a dock and a wraparound porch. The payments traced directly back to the fraudulent accounts in my name. The emails were addressed to both Christian and someone named Meredith. I found her in his photos, hundreds of them, stored in the cloud. Meredith and Christian at Christmas, surrounded by two small children with his eyes. Meredith and Christian on vacation in Bali the same week he told me he was at a conference in Chicago. Meredith and Christian at their wedding 7 years ago. 7 years. There was one last violation waiting for me. When I returned to our bedroom, desperate for something familiar to ground me, I reached for my journal in its hiding place. The document had been accessed multiple times while I was at work. And there, in the margins of my private thoughts, were Christian's notes, mocking comments about my paranoia, laughing at my confusion, strategizing how to respond to my suspicions. I sat on our bedroom floor until darkness fell, surrounded by printouts of credit card statements, screenshots of emails, and photos of his real life, his real family, his real home. Then I made a pot of coffee, arranged everything neatly on our dining table, and waited for my boyfriend of 2 years, the man who had held me through anxiety attacks and told me I was the love of his life, to return from visiting his wife and children. I heard his key in the lock at 9:47 p.m. I'd been sitting at our dining table for 6 hours. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. My body felt hollowed out, my skin stretched too tight over bones that had suddenly become sharp and unfamiliar. He called out my name as he entered, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had once made me feel so safe. The sound of it now made my stomach clench. I didn't answer, just sat there, hands flat on the table, as his footsteps moved through our apartment. Our apartment. The thought almost made me laugh. When he entered the dining room, there was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when he registered what was laid out before me. His eyes swept over the credit card statements, the loan documents, the screenshots of emails, the photos. For just a fraction of a second, surprise flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by something I had never seen before. His features rearranged themselves into a mask of cool assessment, like someone calculating the value of a used car. Gone was the man who had held my hair back when I was sick, who had traced the lines of my palm while we lay in bed on Sunday mornings. He didn't try to deny anything. That was the first surprise. Instead, he set down his bag, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down as if we were about to have a routine discussion about weekend plans. As I confronted him with the evidence of his deception, the stolen identity, the fraudulent accounts, the massive debt, the secret family, he watched me with detached curiosity. The facade I had loved had been completely stripped away. He explained how he'd chosen me at the gallery that night, how he'd researched my income and credit score before even approaching me, how my trusting nature and estrangement from family made me an ideal target. When I asked about Meredith and the children, his expression finally changed. Not remorse, but annoyance, as if I'd brought up an irrelevant topic at a business meeting. That's when the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. I hated that he was seeing me cry one last time. Each sob felt like another victory for him, but I couldn't stop them. Then he reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table between us. He'd been recording our entire conversation, he informed me. He played back snippets of my voice from other recordings, moments of intimacy, vulnerability, even arguments, all captured without my knowledge over our 2 years together. If I reported him to the police or tried to contact Meredith, he would release these recordings. He described in clinical detail how he would edit them to make me sound unstable, obsessive, even threatening. The final blow came when he mentioned Rebecca. She had discovered his marriage 8 months ago after running into him with his family at a restaurant in another city, but he had leverage over her too. Financial information about her brother's struggling business that could ruin him if exposed. She had been silenced by the same calculated cruelty that was now being turned on me. His parting words cut deeper than any knife could have. In seconds, he had reduced 2 years of what I thought was love to a calculated transaction. The warmth in his eyes had completely vanished, replaced by something cold and foreign, as if I'd never really known him at all. He stood, collected his few remaining belongings, and walked out without looking back, leaving me with the ruins of my life spread across our dining table. Update 1. I can't believe I'm even dealing with this after my first post. Thank you all for your support and messages. Sadly, the first eviction notice arrived 3 weeks after Christian left. The rent check, the one I thought had been sent automatically from our joint account, had bounced. The property management company had tried to contact me multiple times. They explained in the letter. Late fees had compounded, $3,200 in penalties on top of the missed rent. I tried to explain what had happened, but sympathy doesn't pay bills. Neither does victimhood. I had exactly 18 days to come up with the money or vacate. My credit cards were all maxed out, both the legitimate ones and the fraudulent ones. My savings had been methodically drained over the past year, something I discovered when I finally regained access to accounts whose passwords had mysteriously changed. At work, I was called into a meeting with HR and my manager. The company had run a routine credit check as part of an internal audit. They were concerned about the sudden, dramatic change in my financial status status, I was placed on probation, my access to financial systems restricted. The physical toll was impossible to ignore. I lost 15 pounds in the first month, food turning to ash in my mouth. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice describing how he'd selected me like a farmer picks out a healthy cow for slaughter. The stress erupted on my skin as shingles, painful blisters spreading across my left side like some biblical plague. The emergency room visit and subsequent treatments added another $4,700 to my mounting debt, with insurance covering barely half. When the final eviction deadline arrived, I still had nowhere to go. My apartment applications were rejected one after another. Credit check failed, credit check failed, credit check failed. A digital scarlet letter following me everywhere. Rebecca tried to help, offering her couch temporarily. The conversation was strained, heavy with her guilt at keeping Christian's secret. I understood her silence. The choice between protecting me and protecting her brother had been an impossible one, but understanding didn't erase the hurt. The most heartbreaking decision came when I had to find a new home for Bruno, my German Shepherd mix. He'd been with me for 6 years, longer than any human relationship, but I couldn't keep shuffling him between friends' apartments, couldn't subject him to an unstable life because of my mistakes. When my friend Lisa agreed to adopt him permanently, I handed over his leash, his favorite toys, his special orthopedic bed. He looked back at me as she led him away, confused by this latest betrayal. The physical reminders of Christian slowly disappeared from my life, but the financial ones multiplied. Each day, the interest on my fraudulent debt grew by approximately $47. I could almost see it. A digital parasite feeding on what remained of my financial identity. I calculated that in the time it took me to brush my teeth each morning, I'd accrued another $1.50 in interest. Between couches and temporary sublets, I tried to piece together some semblance of a plan. But how do you plan when you can't even qualify for a cell phone contract? When the minimum payments on fraudulent debt consume 83% of your take-home pay? When the system designed to protect consumers seems to punish them instead? The bank investigations moved at a glacial pace. Each fraudulent account required its own dispute process, its own documentation, its own interminable hold times and contradictory instructions. While I waited, the interest continued to accumulate, $47 every day, an additional $1,410 every month that I didn't have. I started carrying my important documents everywhere, afraid to leave them anywhere that might not be secure. My laptop, external hard drive with evidence, social security card, birth certificate, all crammed into a backpack that never left my side. The paranoia was exhausting, but felt necessary. In my darker moments, I wondered if Christian had been right about me. Was I really so unlovable that fiction was the only way someone could stay? How had I not seen what was right in front of me? The red flags now seemed so obvious, illuminated by the harsh light of hindsight. The first police officer who took my report was sympathetic. She listened carefully, took meticulous notes, and assured me they would investigate. When I called a week later for an update, a different officer explained that my case had been classified as a civil matter between domestic partners. Since Christian and I had lived together and shared finances, proving criminal intent would be challenging. I explained about the secret wife, the children, the evidence of premeditation. The officer suggested I hire a lawyer. Then came the news that Christian, Meredith, and their children had relocated, not just to another city or state, but to Portugal. A friendly neighbor mentioned it when I was gathering mail from the apartment I could no longer afford. They'd left just 3 days after our confrontation, apparently for a job opportunity they couldn't pass up. The timing wasn't coincidental. Portugal's extradition policies would make pursuing any legal action infinitely more complicated and expensive, something Christian undoubtedly knew. What hurt almost as much as the legal dead ends was the social fallout. Mutual friends questioned my version of events. Some even suggested that perhaps I had known about Meredith all along, that I had been a willing participant in some arrangement that had soured. The doubt in their eyes was familiar. The same look my boss had given me, the same expression the police officer had tried to hide. It was easier for them to believe I was unstable than to accept that someone they knew was capable of such calculated cruelty. My family's response was perhaps the most painful. While my sister Kate eventually came around to being supportive, my parents' reaction was tinged with an unspoken, "I told you so." They had never met Christian. Another red flag I'd overlooked, but now treated my situation as confirmation of their long-held belief that I made poor choices, as if I had failed to read the fine print on a car lease, not had my entire life dismantled by someone I loved. Update 2, it gets so much worse. You can find my original post on my page, but here's more of what's been happening. The most surreal moment came 3 months after Christian disappeared. I was buying coffee at a shop near my temporary housing when I ran into Mark, one of Christian's friends I'd met several times. He greeted me with uncomfortable politeness, then casually mentioned how strange it was that Christian had moved so suddenly. Then came the revelation that several of Christian's friends had known he was married, had met his wife, had seen pictures of their kids. They had assumed I was some sort of willing mistress, a side relationship that Christian's wife tolerated. That night, unable to sleep on yet another borrowed couch, I made the mistake of checking social media. There they were, Christian, Meredith, and their children, smiling in front of their newly renovated lake house. The house, my credit, had built. Meredith had posted about their fresh start in Portugal and how grateful she was for their beautiful lake retreat to come home to during visits. The post had 78 likes. How do you explain to people that the person who destroyed you isn't a monster in every room they enter, that they save their cruelty for private moments and wear kindness like a convenient mask everywhere else? That the man who carefully selected a victim based on her credit score and trusting nature is the same man others know as a devoted father, a generous friend, a charming dinner companion? I hit rock bottom a month later. I'd been staying in a tiny room in a shared house, the cheapest I could find that wasn't actively dangerous. The walls had water damage, the ceiling leaked when it rained hard, and the whole place smelled vaguely of mold. But it was a roof, a door with a lock, and all I could afford. One morning, I woke up with a fever and a cough that felt like broken glass in my lungs. I dragged myself to work anyway. Temp jobs don't come with sick days, and spent 8 hours entering data while shivering and sweating through my clothes. By evening, I could barely stand. The cough had gotten worse, and my fever had spiked to the point where the room seemed to ripple around me. I collapsed on the floor of my bedroom, phone just out of reach, wondering if this was how it ended. Alone in a moldy room, done in by pneumonia because I couldn't afford to miss a day of work. My housemate found me there when she came home from her night shift. Marisa was a nurse's aide, someone I barely knew beyond brief hallway interactions. She took one look at me and went into professional mode, helping me to bed, giving me water and Tylenol, checking my temperature with her own thermometer, 103.2. She insisted I needed to go to urgent care. When I protested about the lack of insurance and cost, she showed me the website for a clinic 6 blocks away that worked on a sliding scale. They opened at 7 a.m. and she'd help me get there before her shift. When I continued to protest weakly, she cut me off. She didn't know my whole story, but she recognized what someone looked like when they'd been through hell. It was time to let someone help me for once. The next morning, foggy with fever, I let her guide me to the clinic. She spoke to the intake nurse, explained my symptoms, waited with me until my name was called. Before leaving for her shift, she pressed a piece of paper into my hand, her phone number, and the name of a financial counselor at the hospital where she worked. The clinic diagnosed pneumonia, gave me antibiotics they pulled from their own sample closet to save me money, and wrote a note excusing me from work for 3 days. When I called my temp agency to explain, they were unsympathetic. My position would be filled by someone else, but I could check back next week to see if anything new had opened up. I spent those 3 days in a fever haze, sleeping fitfully, waking to take medication and sip the soup Marisa occasionally left outside my door. By the time I could breathe without coughing, I'd lost my job and fallen behind on rent for my tiny moldy room. The financial counselor Marisa had recommended called me back quickly. Diane had a no-nonsense voice and rapid-fire questions. Where was I staying? What was my income? Did I have any family support? What was the total debt? After 15 minutes, she had a clear picture of my situation. This was a mess, but not the worst she'd seen. She wanted to start with immediate needs and work outward. Over the next few weeks, Diane became my unlikely lifeline. She connected me with a temporary housing program for women in crisis, helped me apply for emergency assistance to cover medications, and found a community clinic that offered sliding scale therapy. The housing program placed me in a shared apartment with 2 other women. The place was basic but clean, and importantly, free of mold. My roommates kept to themselves, each fighting private battles, but there was an unspoken solidarity in our shared space. The first night in that apartment, with clean sheets and a functioning heater, I slept for 11 straight hours, the first real sleep I'd had in months. Diane also introduced me to Marcus, a pro bono attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases. During our first meeting, he didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead. Cross-border fraud was difficult to prosecute, and the fact that we had lived together and shared finances complicated things. But my journal with Christian's own annotations was something important. These notes demonstrated clear intent. For the first time, someone in authority was looking at my evidence and not immediately dismissing it. The relief was so overwhelming I had to look away, blinking back tears. Marcus helped me separate the accounts into categories: those with the strongest evidence of fraud, those that were more ambiguous, and those that might need to be settled. He filed disputes with credit bureaus, sent formal letters to creditors, and started building a case file even though Christian was safely across the ocean. He was right about finding other victims, because there were others. Through a careful search of public records and some strategic social media sleuthing, Marcus found evidence of 2 other women Christian had financially exploited before me. Both had similar stories: relationships that moved quickly, combined finances, unexplained charges. Neither had pursued legal action, either discouraged by the system or silenced by Christian's threats. Marcus convinced one of them, Elena, to speak with me. Our first conversation was stilted, each of us hesitant to reveal too much, afraid of judgment. But as we shared details, the similarities became undeniable. The same phrases, the same excuses, the same calculated dismantling of our financial independence. Elena revealed that Christian had told her the same thing he told me as he left, that she wasn't the kind of woman men build real lives with, just the kind kind they use. I'd never told anyone about the cruel things Christian had said to me that final night. Hearing his pattern, the same wounds inflicted with surgical precision, was both devastating and validating. I wasn't alone. I wasn't uniquely foolish or desperate. I was one target in a practice predator's hunting ground. With Elena's permission, Marcus added her evidence to our growing file. It wasn't enough to bring Christian back from Portugal, but it strengthened the case we were building with credit card companies and banks. Next update: 6 months after Christian left, I found a steady job through an employment program Diane had connected me to. The position was basic administrative work for a local nonprofit, less money than I had made before, but stable, with supervisors who understood I was rebuilding my life. My new coworker, Jai, was the first person I met who had no connection to my past life with Christian. He was quiet, efficient, and shared his homemade lunches without comment when he noticed I sometimes didn't bring food. He never asked why I jumped when the office door slammed, or why I triple-checked my purse before leaving each day. Slowly, I started establishing a new normal. The temporary housing program extended my stay. Marcus continued fighting individual creditors with mixed success. One credit card company agreed to discharge their entire balance after reviewing our evidence. A small victory, but one that gave me hope the others might follow. I created spreadsheets tracking every expense, every debt payment, every small step forward. The interest continued to accumulate, but slower now that some accounts were closed. The daily calculation, $47 of new debt each morning, became $32, then $28. My sister Kate finally visited, her first time seeing where I lived since everything collapsed. She sat awkwardly on the edge of my narrow bed, looking around the sparse room I'd tried to make homey with a secondhand plant, and photos taped to the wall. She apologized for not being there sooner, for not helping more. I didn't have the energy for blame or absolution. Instead, I made us tea in chipped mugs, and we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. About Christian, yes, but also about our parents, our childhood, the distance that had grown between us long before Christian engineered it. As she was leaving, Kate pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside was $2,000 in cash. She insisted it wasn't a loan, but what she should have done months ago. That money became my emergency fund, hidden in a sock in my dresser drawer. I didn't spend it on debt or past due bills. Having that cushion, that small protection against future disaster, was worth more than the immediate relief of paying down another fraudulent charge. A year after Christian disappeared to Portugal, my life had stabilized in small, practical ways. I had moved from the temporary housing to a tiny studio apartment I could just afford with my nonprofit salary. The place was the size of a large closet, but it was mine alone. I'd furnished it with thrift store finds and free items from online neighborhood groups. Marcus had succeeded in getting 3 of the fraudulent accounts discharged completely, about $38,000 of the original $87,000 debt. The others remained in various stages of dispute, but even partial victories helped rebuild my credit score inch by painful inch. I'd started a support group with Elena and 2 other women we'd connected with who had similar experiences. We met monthly in a community center conference room, sharing resources, strategies, small triumphs. Sometimes we just listened to each other's anger and grief, the emotions that friends and family grew tired of hearing, but that we understood intimately. I was still a long way from whole. Nightmares woke me regularly. Unexpected expenses sent me into panic spirals. Dating seemed like something people did in another universe, but I was surviving, and some days, even finding small moments of peace. Then one evening, as I was walking home from work, a familiar car pulled up beside me. My heart rate spiked immediately, adrenaline flooding my system. I quickened my pace, eyes focused straight ahead, ready to run. The passenger window rolled down and Meredith called my name. She was alone in the car, her hands visible on the steering wheel. She looked tired, thinner than in the photos I'd seen, the confident smile replaced by something more hesitant. She asked for 5 minutes of my time. She needed to talk to me. Every instinct screamed danger. This was the woman who had benefited from my destruction, who lived in the house funded by my stolen credit, whose children had college funds filled with money that should have been mine. But curiosity won out. I got into her car. For a long moment, she just stared straight ahead through the windshield. Then, without looking at me, she revealed that Christian had done it again, this time to her. He'd emptied their accounts 3 months ago and disappeared. Not just moved out, vanished completely. The Portuguese police were uninterested in what they saw as a marital dispute. The lake house was in foreclosure. Her credit was in ruins. She'd found my name in his files before he left. At first, she thought I was just another woman he was seeing, but then she found the emails, the statements. She realized what he'd done to me. She knew where he was now and wanted to help me get justice. Christian, it turned out, hadn't disappeared. He'd simply moved on to his next target, a wealthy widow in Madrid whose late husband had left her a substantial estate. Meredith had tracked him through their children's email accounts, which he still occasionally checked. His new identity, new life, new victim, all laid out in digital breadcrumbs he thought no one would follow. Marcus was skeptical when I called him with this information. Meeting with Meredith could be a trap, he warned. Christian could be using her to get information about my case, to assess what evidence I had against him. But when Meredith arrived at his office the next day with a flash drive containing email histories, financial records, and most importantly, Christian's current address and alias, Marcus's skepticism began to fade. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked with contacts in European law enforcement, building a case that spanned spanned multiple jurisdictions. Meredith provided testimony about accounts I hadn't even known existed, filling in gaps in the financial timeline that strengthened our case immeasurably. But legal proceedings move at a glacial pace, especially across international borders. As weeks stretched into months, I focused on continuing to rebuild my life rather than pinning all my hopes on justice that might never come. My job at the nonprofit had evolved into something more substantial. My boss had noticed my meticulous tracking of expenses and budgets, skills honed through my own financial reconstruction, and moved me into a role helping with grant management. The slight increase in salary allowed me to start saving a small amount each month, building a real emergency fund beyond Kate's gift. The studio apartment began to feel more like home. I'd added plants that stubbornly thrived despite my inconsistent care, put up curtains that transformed the harsh overhead lighting, found a secondhand bookshelf that I filled gradually with paperbacks from neighborhood little free libraries. My support group expanded as word spread through counselors and financial advisors who worked with victims of economic abuse. We outgrew the community center conference room and moved to a church basement that could accommodate our growing numbers. Each meeting still held pain and anger, but increasingly also contained practical advice, job leads, recommendations for understanding landlords, or flexible payment plans. I began working with a community college counselor to explore returning to school part-time, thinking about how to rebuild not just financially, but professionally. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time since Christian left, I could imagine a future beyond mere survival. Then, 8 months after Meredith's return, and nearly 2 years after Christian's departure, I received a call from Marcus. Spanish authorities had arrested Christian that morning, trying to board a flight to Morocco. Apparently, his new target's son became suspicious and hired a private investigator. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. After so long, after adjusting to the idea that justice might never come, the news didn't feel real. Marcus explained that extradition proceedings would take time. There were multiple jurisdictions involved, multiple charges, but Christian was in custody now, and he wasn't going anywhere. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, uncertain how to process this unexpected development. I'd built my new life around the assumption that Christian would never face consequences. What did it mean that he might? The process was every bit as complicated as Marcus had warned. Statements, affidavits, evidence submissions, all flowing back and forth between countries and jurisdictions. Christian hired expensive lawyers who fought every charge, every extradition request. The legal dance continued for months as he remained in Spanish custody. During this time, I met Meredith for coffee occasionally. Our relationship was complicated, neither friendship nor alliance exactly, but a shared understanding that no one else could fully comprehend. Her children, now living with her mother while she rebuilt her life, remained a painful reminder of what Christian had stolen from both of us in different ways. Nearly a year after his arrest, Christian was finally extradited to the United States. The court date was set for a Tuesday in March, almost 3 years to the day since I'd discovered that first credit card statement in the mail. I took the day off work, dressed in clothes borrowed from Kate, a simple navy blazer and slacks that made me look more put together than I felt. Marcus met me outside the courthouse, his familiar briefcase in hand. He reminded me quietly that this wasn't about Christian anymore. This was about establishing the facts for the civil cases against the credit card companies still fighting us. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, the proceedings more mundane. No dramatic confrontations, no impassioned speeches, just the steady documentation of fraud across years and victims, the methodical presentation of evidence we'd gathered. Christian sat at the defense table, his posture still carrying that easy confidence I remembered so well. He looked good, rested, expensive haircut, clothing that fit perfectly. The year in Spanish custody apparently hadn't diminished his ability to project success. When our eyes met briefly as I took the stand, I expected to feel something momentous: fear, rage, vindication. Instead, I felt a curious detachment, as if I were observing a stranger with only passing resemblance to the man I'd once loved. I told my story clearly, referring to documentation when necessary, answering questions from both prosecutors and defense attorneys without embellishment. The details that had once felt so raw, the discovering of accounts, the confrontation, the threats, the recordings, now had the distance of a story that had happened to someone else. Christian's lawyer tried to paint our relationship as a mutual financial arrangement gone sour, suggesting I'd been aware of the accounts and only objected when Christian ended things. But the evidence, particularly my journal with his own mocking annotations, made this difficult to sustain. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, legs slightly shaky from standing so long, Marcus gave me a small nod of approval. I'd done what I came to do. The rest was out of my hands. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended only when required to testify, focusing instead on my daily life, work, classes, support group, the small apartment that had become genuinely mine. Whatever the outcome, I had decided it wouldn't define my future. In the end, Christian was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. The sentence, 8 years with possibility of parole after 5, felt simultaneously too much and not enough for the devastation he had caused. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. More importantly for my practical concerns, the conviction provided leverage for Marcus to negotiate with the remaining creditors. Within 6 months of the verdict, the last of the fraudulent accounts had been discharged. My credit score, while still not what it had been, had climbed back into the range where apartments didn't automatically reject my application applications. On the 1-year anniversary of Christian's conviction, I invited the women from my support group to my apartment for dinner. It was a tight fit, 12 of us crowded around my small table and spilling into the living area, but we made it work. We ate potluck dishes, drank cheap wine, and celebrated small victories: a new job, an approved apartment application, a debt discharged, a night without nightmares. Later that evening, after most had left, Elena stayed to help with dishes. We worked in comfortable silence until she mentioned seeing Meredith at the grocery store the previous week. When I asked how she was, Elena shared that Meredith seemed to be doing well. She'd moved to a smaller place near her mom, had the kids full-time now. She'd asked about me. I nodded, continuing to dry the dishes. Meredith emailed sometimes, sent holiday cards. Elena observed how strange it was that we were all connected by Christian, but were building something without him. Later that night, after Elena left, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights. 3 years since my world had collapsed around me. 3 years of rebuilding, piece by painstaking piece. My life wasn't what I had imagined it would be before Christian. It was smaller in some ways, a studio apartment instead of a house, a modest job instead of a career track, careful budgeting instead of financial ease. But it was mine, truly mine, built with a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Last month, I ran into someone who looked like Christian on the street, the same height, similar build, that distinctive way of moving. For a split second, my heart raced, my palms dampened. Then the man turned, revealing a face nothing like Christian's, and I realized something profound. I had felt nothing beyond the momentary physical reaction. No fear, no hatred, no longing. Just recognition followed by dismissal. It was the most concrete evidence of my healing I had yet experienced. I am not the woman he met at that gallery, nor the woman he left broken. The person I've become isn't defined by what was done to me, but she was absolutely forged in that fire. The woman I am now would recognize him at first glance. Not just him, but anyone like him. That's not paranoia. It's a superpower I paid too high a price to acquire, but it's mine now, and I'm using it to build something he could never destroy again.